The following program, NORML Show Live, is intended for responsible adults only. We advocate for the repeal of marijuana prohibition for adults. We discuss the science, culture, and controversy about America's marijuana laws. We do not advocate or encourage any illegal activity and advise all listeners to learn their state and federal marijuana laws by visiting norml.org, NORML.org. Opinions and claims made by guests and advertisers of NORML Show Live are their own and do not necessarily reflect the philosophy and policies of NORML. Listener discretion is advised.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
From the promise of legalization.
And I think we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
To the agony of prohibition.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws presents NORML Show Live, Marijuana Nation. Now, here's your host, NORML's Outreach Coordinator, Radical Russ Belden.
All right, good day, tokers and tokettes, and welcome to the middle of the week. It's Wednesday, May 9th, 2012, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world, and certainly here in beautiful Portland, Oregon. We're coming to you live from Rolla J Studios. Glad to be here. Glad to have you here. And let me get to all the rest of the folks that help make this show possible. First of all, hanging out over here on camera 2, we got Wiz Khalifa joining us today. How you doing, Wiz Khalifa?
Aloha, doing quite well on this Irie Wednesday.
We got all sorts of great news to talk about on today's show and in hour 2. So I know Khalifa's got a lot to say about it, so we'll get to that
certainly
soon enough. Also from our virtual studio in beautiful Astoria, Oregon, we have our senior news editor, Cannabis Carrie. Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Russ. Hi, Kaliko. How are things going today?
Oh, we're doing really, really good. You know, when I was in Texas, I got to talking to people, and we got to talking about you, and I mentioned that you're in beautiful Astoria, Oregon. And to a person, they all said, oh, yeah, that's where the Goonies was filmed.
Isn't that funny? I was just in the Oregon Film Museum this morning. That's in Astoria. I got to see lots of Goonie gear.
And I said, poor Carrie. I mean, she's such a Lewis and Clark fanatic. She could tell you all this great history, but no, it's the Goonies.
The Goonies bring them all here. That's okay. They come for the Goonies. They stay for the Lewis and Clark. That's my hope.
There we go. All right. Well, Carrie brings us our hemp headlines right after the first break. We got all sorts of news today. So what's in the headlines?
Well, my head is spinning. Colorado legislature has been so exciting. It's going to be our top story, but by the time I finish it, it will probably have changed again. So I'll get to that one right off the bat so that news will be current. Also, I'm going to tell you a story about some California weed that's showing up on the East Coast. And then we also have a story. I'm going to bring it back. We haven't done this for a long time, Russ, but I know it's been so long since you've heard the intro. I've got a stupid stoner story for you today.
Oh, good.
Goody,
I'm looking forward to that. Yay, stupid stoner story. Plus, I got some news from our Attorney General race here in Oregon, and I want to update people on Montana's referendum on medical marijuana coming up in their election. So we'll talk about that in the news. Then coming up at 20 after, we've got our Irie Wednesday, which I'm going to commandeer once again to play more music from the Dallas Cinco de Mota March. We're going to play some music from Pistol Packin' Mama. And then it's time for Cannabis Science. Unfortunately, Dr. Mitch can't be with us today. Yes, I know you're all upset about it, as am I. He can't be with us today, so I'm going to have Lanny Swerdlow filling in. He did an excellent interview with Dr. Donald Tashkin, the pulmonologist from the University of California, Los Angeles Medical Center there. So all the stuff you need to know about marijuana smoking and your lungs and your health, you want to stay tuned for this interview. It's fantastic. And then at the end, some funny stuff about seniors. We're right back after this.
You're listening to NORML Show Live, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Weedmaps.com. I'm Radical Russ from NORML. In my job as outreach coordinator, I travel every month, and when I'm on the road, I need a fast, accurate way to find the medical marijuana dispensaries in the area. So I turn to Weedmaps.com. Weedmaps.com has the best dispensary locator online or on your mobile device. Search by zip code or let Weedmaps find you, and in seconds you'll have the addresses, phone numbers, and customer service reviews for the medical marijuana dispensaries in the local area. Weedmaps.com also has a section devoted to helping you find a doctor who understands and recommends medical marijuana under your state's law. You can even check prices on the Medical Marijuana Stock Exchange. Coming soon, you'll even be able to find the listings of NORML attorneys and chapters, local head shops and grow shops, and the best weed-friendly businesses. Weedmaps.com has the information you need to be an informed cannabis consumer. Visit Weedmaps.com today, a proud sponsor of the NORML Network.
How's it, everyone? This is Yee from Pepper, and you're listening to the NORML Show Live.
Hi, I'm Radical Russ. One of the best things about marijuana is the wonderful aroma. But when you travel a lot like I do, that aroma becomes a suspicious smell. That's why I endorse stealth-products.com, the leaders in smell-proof containers. From smell-proof vacuum bags to smell-proof backpacks and duffel bags, all the way to smell-proof digital safes, stealth-products.com has you covered. Stealth-products.com brings you safe, secure, odorless layers of protection with activated carbon fiber. Backpacks and duffel bags are simple black so as not to attract attention with a logo or flashy design. Now, nothing is perfectly odor controlled from the detection of drug dogs, but with proper vigilance, containers from stealth-products.com will help you avoid nosy humans.
You're now listening to Elliot Beats.
Stealth-products.com. Stealth-products.com.
Medical marijuana, industrial hemp, consumer cannabis. It's time for this week's NORML News with Cannabis Carrie.
What a wild ride for opponents and advocates of the Stone driving bill in Colorado. We're talking about Senate Bill 117 today. In a political twist of fate, the bill that was, then wasn't, then was again, now has died, we think, on the Senate House floor, along with 29 other casualties. I've got more on that, Russ. Hold your applause. Bills that were left to die having not been voted on during this session. Now, the bill that was introduced by Senator Steve King, a Republican from Grand Junction, would have set a TH blood limit of 5 nanograms per milliliter to measure impairment beyond their ability to legally operate a vehicle. A similar bill was hotly debated last summer, but ended up being narrowly voted down in a science versus science showdown, with one side saying the science was faulty at best, and the side for the low limit set for THC in the bloodstream saying that 5 nanograms per milliliter would show recent consumption. Senator King revived that same bill this year, and it narrowly passed the House last month. In the Senate, where the bill died last year, it looked like it was headed for the same fate. Last week, we reported that Senate Bill 117 seemed dead on a voice vote, but then Senator King, in the final moments of the day, asked for a one-by-one recorded vote before it got tabled. And shockingly, it picked up a few votes to pass 18-17. But the rules say that it needed one final recorded vote in the Senate before heading to the governor's desk. But Senate Bill 117 never got that finalized vote. There was a showdown over a civil union bill in Colorado. It became the focus of an emotional debate for the last 2 days of a legislative session in Colorado. And that bill that would have allowed same-sex couples to form civil unions died before being voted on, as well as taking the next 30 bills that were scheduled, including Senate Bill 117, with it. The House floor erupted with chants of shame on you for the ending to this year's lawmaking session. I almost said lovemaking session. Surely that was not what it was. But Senator King today came out and said that he will introduce the same bill again next year unless he sees more of an aggressive stance against the consuming cannabis and driving from our side. Now, for the record, this bill would have set a limit so that law enforcement would get a shortcut on prosecutions of stoned drivers. It's already illegal in Colorado and everywhere else to drive while impaired on marijuana, but currently law enforcement prosecutors have to prove the impairment on a case-by-case basis. Now, just before we came to news time today, Governor John Hickenlooper today said at a press conference that the civil union bill would definitely be addressed in a special session. He's going to open a special session. So there are rumors now that some of those other bills that got tabled might get another vote. We don't know yet if SB 117 is one of them, but if Senator King has his way, it surely will be.
Yeah, this is just Man, I don't know how to feel about this because of course I'm thrilled that the per se DUID bill died an ignominious death there. That's fantastic. But it died because people wanted to debate whether or not gay people should be able to have even second-class marriage, civil unions, second-class marriage. And that held it up. Why must people be so concerned about what adults are doing, whether it be smoking marijuana or being in love with someone of the same sex and wanting to express that in an adult fashion and have all of the same rights and responsibilities as everyone else in our society? It's just, again, shame, like they chanted there in the State House, and even more shame as even our president has come around today. This is breaking news that happened as well, where President Obama sat down in an interview and said he now supports equal marriage rights for gay people, just like straight people have. So it's just, and what other bills managed to die during this debate over the civil unions? What else is among the 30 bills here that didn't get heard in the end here? Was it things that had to do with funding of the government or appropriation? I don't know. I'm trying to find out here. I'm going to find more information for hour 2 to find just what else had to be scuttled, had to be not discussed, because a few retrograde reprobates in the Colorado legislature want to deny equal rights to all people in their laws, in their constitution. It's just disgusting.
And on Monday in New Hampshire, police made a marijuana bust in Kingston. Now, what made the front page news was that the 15 pounds of marijuana found at 37-year-old Scott Bitano's house was labeled and packaged for sale as medical and only in the state of California. Investigators say that they found 1 pound that had been shipped through the mail from California, and then found the extra 14 pounds in his home. All 15 pounds was labeled and packaged and worth just over $40,000 label price. The Rockingham County Sheriff's Department said that they had been investigating Bentano for the last 6 months. He was taken in and arrested on Monday and is still awaiting for his bail to be set.
Well, these stories keep piling up. We seem to get another one every week, 2 or 3 a week sometimes, where someone on the East Coast is busted with West Coast medical marijuana. And clearly that it's been coming from people that have been using a medical marijuana law to be able to cover what they're doing. And I'm not passing judgment on this. I'm just telling you this kind of thing is inevitable. It's just inevitable when on the West Coast we can grow lots and lots of marijuana and its retail price is relatively cheap because of all of the competition, where on the East Coast they can't, and the price is skyrocketed because there's not a whole lot of competition. I mean, it's just the nature of supply and demand that this is going to happen. And it's why I say that we are in this window now between 2012 and 2016 where we've got the opportunity to legalize marijuana for any purpose, because so long as we keep the legalization of marijuana hinging on whether or not you're using it for the right reasons as declared by a state law, or you have the right exceptions and second-class citizenship for use of marijuana, so long as that exists, this other side where healthy people are using it, where the mass majority of the market exists, it's just going to continue to creep and overlap each other. And there's going to be more and more attempts to try to separate the two by making it tougher to get on the medical marijuana rolls, to make it tougher to qualify, to have lower limits, to have dispensary-only marijuana where they can keep track of every single gram of that dried vegetable matter to make sure, oh God, that it doesn't get out and somebody healthy might smoke it. That's the direction medical marijuana is going. That's the way the pendulum is swinging. We've got FDA trials of Sativex that are saying we should have this on the market by 2015 at the latest, maybe by 2013, 2014. We've got 18, 19, 20 countries in the European Union that have already approved it, Canada, New Zealand that have already approved Sativex, and more cannabinoid pharmaceuticals are coming. It is crucial that at this time, in this election in 2012, especially in Washington State, Oregon, and Colorado, where we've got decent chances to finally break through the paradigm that there's got to be something wrong with you to smoke pot, and instead recognize that it's a right of all adults and it's the heritage of all Americans to make the use of the hemp crop and spread it widely.
Okay, a stupid stoner story for you today, Russ. I was looking for our intro.
Oh my goodness, I was so enraged that I didn't get the stupid stoner story intro going. How terrible of me. Let's see if I can find that here for us here. Let's bring that up. We got the stupid stoners going. No, we don't. You're just going to have to
That's
go with
okay.
it.
It's okay. At least I don't have to put up with the bed music on
Yeah,
that.
no kidding.
Okay, now it's been a long time since I let a stupid stoner story slip in, so here we go. From Opelousas, and I hope I'm saying that right, Rio. From Opelousas, Louisiana, a woman went to a police station on Monday afternoon at 4:30 p.m. Now, maybe that was a clue. She should not have gone so soon after 4:20. Anyway, I digress. The 31-year-old woman, who we are not naming to protect her identity, went to the police station to make a formal complaint against somebody. After she filled out her paperwork and left the station, officers noticed that there was a bag of marijuana on the floor near the chair where she had been sitting. So they went to the surveillance cameras that you can be sure of there in police stations and courthouses everywhere. And they saw that the bag of marijuana had clearly fallen from the woman's clothing. The woman, who had just left all of her contact information for the police, was called and asked to kindly return to the station, which she did, where she was promptly booked for possession of marijuana. Now, this leads us to a list of places that I'd like to say that are inappropriate to bring your stash.
Okay.
Now, this list is rather long, Russ, so we're just going to give you the first one from the list today, the police station.
Yes, maybe that would not be the place to try to get rid of your weed. Oh, my God. Thanks for that story, Carrie. Folks, be careful. The reason we tell these stories is because, it is kind of funny in a tragic sort of way, but it's also meant to be a learning point here, a teachable moment, if you will, that as stoners, as cannabis consumers, we have to be ultra careful. You've got to check your pockets when you go to places like the airport or the courthouse or the police station. You've got to be ultra vigilant when you go driving. You've got to check to see whether your blinkers are working, your tags are up to date, whether there's anything about the mechanical functioning of your car that is going to attract the attention of law enforcement officers. You've got to store your weed in the trunk when you're going around. You've got to make sure that you're obeying traffic laws. You're not speeding or weaving or driving erratically. We have to be ultra vigilant because we can't have you helping us change these marijuana laws from a cell. In most places, you can't vote from a cell, and we need your votes to help change this. All right. Thanks, Carrie, for the news. I wanted to bring up some other information from our Attorney General's race here in the state of Oregon. Just to catch some of you up, we have 2 Democratic challengers in the primary and no Republicans running for the office as of yet. So pretty much whoever wins this Democratic primary has the fast track to most likely become the Attorney General. It's currently a race between Dwight Holton and Ellen Rosenblum. Now, Dwight Holton has been attacked by the medical marijuana community here, including a few political action campaigns that have been formed to say no on Dwight, that Dwight's not right, particularly for his role as the U.S. attorney, an appointed U.S. attorney, sending out the threat letters to the dispensaries in the state of Oregon, the people that are trying to get medicine to the patients, threatening them with seizures and raids and so forth. He has also been quoted as calling the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act a train wreck and said that he would work with the Republicans even though he's running as a Democrat, would work with the Republicans in the Oregon State Legislature to help modify and curb the, quote, abuses of the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act. By contrast, Ellen Rosenblum, who is has been an Oregon judge and done her whole time here in Oregon, as opposed to Holton, who is basically a transplant from Virginia, Ellen Rosenblum has stated that she will support the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act and not make marijuana enforcement a large priority. Well, with that background, I'm very pleased to announce that the Drug Policy Alliance, one of its political action committees, has just donated $70,000. That's right, $70,000 to the campaign of Ellen Rosenblum. And what I want to point this out, and the reason why this is such a news story to me, is because for the first time, candidates are having to answer on the medical marijuana issue. It's become an issue that has defined this race. Just recently, Dwight Holton put out a quote that Khalifa was showing me earlier on the show, or before the show, about how he's touting the out-of-state drug legalizer money and the in-state drug legalizer money that is going toward Ellen Rosenblum's campaign and against his campaign. He's trying to burnish his law and order credentials. Hell, he'll get tough on the drug war, but he still, of course, respects Oregon Medical Marijuana Act. But of course, we can all read through the lines and know exactly what he wants to do to the act. His idea of who is a legitimate medical marijuana patient certainly does not bode well for most of the patients in the program. He's one of those types, along with the Oregon Republicans, who keep chanting about abuse because, oh my gosh, there's so many patients. Gee, more people are getting relief from using medical cannabis. More people are able to put aside their pharmaceutical remedies and use something natural and non-toxic. Oh my God, we can't have more people in that program. That would be terrible. A program from which we steal money from to balance other state budgets. So it's some great news, 70,000 to the Ellen campaign, and we'll keep you posted on further developments.
Well, it's 20 after the hour, which means we need to get caught up with our friends that are a little ahead of us in our time zone.
I agree with that. And in hour 2, we'll talk a little bit more about this. We'll look up that Dwight letter and talk about that, too.
Figure it out.
All right,
it's 20 after the hour, and we have to take a short break, if you know what I mean. Please support these sponsors who support Normal Show Live.
Oh, have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. If he said he swam to China, he would send you South Carolina. Then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
I'm Sub Cool from Team Green Avenger. At TGAgenetics.com, we are working on the leading edge of medical strains. Our strains are rigorously tested for THC, CBD, THCV, and other critical cannabinoids. Know your grow. Check out our genetic diversity at TGAgenetics.com, the home of Jelly Bean, Jack the Ripper, Vortex, and other award-winning cannabis strains.
The Normal Network brings you the best in daily toker tunes at 3 and 9 o'clock Pacific Time, AM and PM, every weekday. Each day features a different genre, including Roots Monday, Electric Tuesday, Irie Wednesday, Groovin' Thursday, and Rockin' Friday. Then on weekends from 10 to 3 p.m. Pacific, we mix them all together in our weekend music party.
Hi, this is Alan St. Pierre, Executive Director of NORML. We are the oldest, largest, and best-known marijuana law reform organization in America, and it's all because of your support. Take some time to join NORML at www.norml.org. Your membership supports this podcast, our websites, our policy research and analysis, and our annual conferences. Changing marijuana laws is a grassroots effort, and it starts with you, the stakeholder. Join NORML today and add your voice to the millions of cannabis consumers who demand equality with our beer-drinking friends.
It's time for your daily toker tunes, the best in 420 friendly music from all genres that uplifts, entertains, and informs the public. Today we get tunes for Irie Wednesday, our celebration of that mellow vibe we find in the best of reggae, ska, calypso, and Latin music. If you'd like to submit your song to be played on Normal Show Live, send it to us at stash@normal.org. Now here's some more great independent marijuana music for today's Daily Toker Tunes.
All right, folks, on today's show, I'm also calling an audible. Normally we'd have Kyle, a.k.a. NorCal Perps, here with us. He is in the backstage chat, but I'm just going to take this one today because I want to play more music from Cinco de Mota down there in Dallas, Texas. And one of the members of one of the bands, of the band I'm about to play, is in the chat room right now. So I want to say a howdy to Justin Tweed, who's hanging out there from Texas in our chat room, and wanted to play this song from his band that was out there at Cinco de Mota. They're called Pistol Packin' Mama, and I don't know which song this is going to be that is playing on this particular video. This was uploaded by the folks at DFW NORML, so we will just see what comes up, but this is Pistol Packin' Mama at Cinco de Mota. Yeah, that's Pistol Packin' Mama from Cinco de Mota. You can check out that band and their stuff at ppmband.com.
The law offices of Omar Figueroa would like to remind you to stand up for your rights. Please do not give up your precious liberties. There's nothing wrong with standing up for our constitutional rights, and in fact, it's the only way to honor the Constitution that recognizes our natural rights. Treat law enforcement with respect and respect the Constitution by standing up for your rights. If you are detained or arrested, stand up for your rights by repeating, "I respectfully invoke all my legal and constitutional rights. I do not consent to any search and seizure. I want to remain silent, and I want to speak to my attorney, Omar Figueroa." Omar Figueroa has more than a decade of experience in federal and California courts and graduated from Yale University, Stanford Law School, and Trial Lawyers College. Please contact the law offices of Omar Figueroa at 415-489-0420 or 707-829-0215 or on the web at www.omarfigueroa.com.
You're listening to the Normal Network, where the time is 4:20, 24/7, 365. Except Cannabis Carry's house, where the laws of space and time do not apply. Been busted? Need a lawyer? Call the Normal Legal Committee for an attorney near you. Find one at NORML.org. Remember, attorneys are cheaper than a lifelong criminal drug record.
It's that freedom. I'm free to do it.
Hey, tokers and tokettes, this is Radical Russ from NORML Show Live. We're proud to be the voice of the marijuana nation and proud to have you on our team. Now, you can represent NSL in your own NORML Show Live gear from handmadeapparel.biz. Adam Hand of Handmade Apparel is one of us and a huge supporter of our show. He's designed the classic blockhead line of NSL shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Worn by Radical Russ, Cannabis Carry, and Ganja John on the show and at live events, the designs feature their iconic logos and the "It's got to be 420 somewhere in the world" tagline. Proceeds directly benefit NORML Show Live and HandmadeApparel.biz, one of our community's strongest supporters. You can also get your Cannabis Cure UK, Ganja John Show, Irie Island Hour, and more gear from the NORML Network at HandmadeApparel.biz. Visit HandmadeApparel.biz today.
It's time for NORML Show Live's Cannabis Science with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Dr. Earlywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York in Albany and the author of Understanding Marijuana. Now here's your dose of cannabis science.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Half past, and normally at this time we'd be introducing Dr. Mitch Earlywine. He had to take the day off today, so we are going to bring you still some more cannabis science, though. That's what this day is all about. So if you follow our network, you know on Tuesdays we feature the show Marijuana, Compassion, and Common Sense with Lanny Swerdlow, who's been a longtime activist in California and, you know, very, very educated on this issue. He did an interview a while back of Dr. Donald Tashkin. He's the UCLA pulmonologist who's probably done more study on marijuana smokers and the effects on their lungs than any other human being on the planet. And I thought this would be appropriate here for our Science Wednesday, so check it out. This is Donald Tashkin and Lanny Swerdlow from his video series.
We're now in the office of Dr. Donald Tashkin, noted pulmonary researcher here at the UCLA School of Medicine. Thank you very much for joining us today, Doctor.
It's my pleasure.
The show, of course, is Marijuana, Compassion, and Common Sense, and we'd like to talk to you about, you've done years of research with marijuana in relation to pulmonary systems. Is that correct?
That's right. Would you like me to tell you?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your
my research and the results. I'm primarily interested in the health effects of marijuana, with the focus on potential adverse or harmful effects of marijuana rather than beneficial effects. Therefore, what I have to say may have some negativity to it in terms of the potential medicinal applications of marijuana use. But marijuana is smoked, generally. It could be eaten, but it's usually smoked. And it has very many of the same components in the smoke as are found in tobacco.
That was one of your research studies, wasn't it, to determine the carcinogens into marijuana smoke?
Well, our focus was actually to look not just at potential carcinogenic effects of marijuana, but also other possible health consequences, including chronic bronchitis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, impairment in the lungs, defense against infection such as pneumonia. So we did wide-ranging studies over the past more than 30 years. Now, I could actually tell you in a nutshell what the results of those studies are if you...
I want to get to that. First, why did you get involved in marijuana research? What interests you in marijuana research in particular?
Well, honestly, I was asked to look at the short-term, acute effects of marijuana on the lung by another investigator who had a grant from the National Institute of Mental Health back in the 1970s. And he felt, rightly, that since marijuana smoke is similar to tobacco smoke in many respects, and we know that tobacco smoke is harmful to the lung, that perhaps marijuana might share some of the same unhealthful consequences. So he asked me to look at short-term effects of marijuana smoking on the lung. We know that when you smoke tobacco, the airways, the bronchial tubes, tend to constrict immediately after smoking, and that constriction narrowing remains for several minutes, more than 15 to 30 minutes. So my first experiment was to see what happens to the size, the caliber of the airways after smoking marijuana compared to smoking tobacco. And I was amazed that after smoking marijuana, the airways actually opened up, dilated, in contrast to the effect of tobacco. So this piqued my interest, and we subsequently applied for some funding to look more carefully and in greater detail at the effects of marijuana on lung function, both the short-term effects and the long-term effects. That got me interested, and the more and more that we researched marijuana effects on the lung, we found important differences from tobacco that kept us going.
Well, now, what studies have you participated in that you feel kind of stand out as on your marijuana research? Because I know you must have done a whole bunch.
Right. We back in the 1980s, we recruited a large cohort of people from the Los Angeles area who smoked marijuana heavily. By heavily, we mean at least one joint a day for at least 5 years. And on the average, they smoked about 3 joints a day for 15 years. So that's pretty heavy smoking. We also recruited people who didn't smoke marijuana but smoked tobacco only. Smokers of both marijuana and tobacco. In fact, there were more of those than the marijuana-only smokers, as you might surmise. And also non-smokers of anything as controls. And there were about over 450 such individuals, and we have tracked them until the present time. So we performed a battery of studies on them initially, and we repeated some of those studies over time. Those studies consisted of just administering a health questionnaire to find out whether or not there was any impact of marijuana smoking on respiratory health. And we found that there was a much higher proportion of marijuana smokers, but marijuana only without tobacco, who complained of cough on most days for at least 3 months out of the year for 2 or more years. That's the definition of chronic bronchitis. They also brought up sputum. They wheezed on more than 21 days a year. They didn't have any increased shortness of breath compared to control. So immediately we could say from this study that marijuana smoking, heavy, regular marijuana smoking, is associated with chronic bronchitis. Now, and about a comparable proportion of tobacco smokers also had symptoms of chronic bronchitis. So and we were surprised at that because the average number of tobacco cigarettes smoked per day by the tobacco smokers was about a little over a pack, 22 a day, as compared to 3 marijuana joints a day. So there already was a 7-to-1 ratio, and yet there was comparability with respect to the impact on respiratory symptoms. we wondered about that, and that was the basis for some other work that we did. We thought that maybe the reason for the similarity in symptoms, despite the disparity in the amount of the plant substance smoke, might be due to a different way that the marijuana is smoked, might be due to more delivery of the irritants and gases and particulates in the smoke from marijuana than tobacco, because of differences in the way the cigarette is prepared. We know that marijuana cigarette joints are loosely packed or not filtered, whereas tobacco cigarettes are filtered and more tightly packed. So, and what we found after a series of experiments was about 4 times as much tar. Tar is the insoluble particulate particle fraction of the smoke, which contains carcinogens. Benzpyrene is the most potent of these carcinogens. And the 4 times as much was deposited in the lung compared from marijuana, single marijuana cigarette, compared to a tobacco cigarette of the same weight. Now, normally marijuana cigarettes don't weigh as much as tobacco cigarettes. So that amplified the effect of tobacco, but that didn't appear to account entirely for this disparity. So I think that the question is not entirely answered, but maybe partially answered. We also looked at lung function. We know that if you smoke cigarettes, you have about a 20% chance of developing COPD, chronic obstructive bronchitis and emphysema, which, when it is severe, is associated with symptoms of difficulty breathing on exertion and results in an increased mortality, not only from COPD itself, but also from heart disease. So we performed the test of lung function. We were surprised. We found that there was no abnormality that we could detect in the lung function of smokers, heavy smokers of marijuana, but there were abnormalities in lung function in the smokers of tobacco only, and there was no additive effect. So we thought, well, maybe there would be a change over time, that we know that COPD is characterized by an accelerated rate of loss of lung function over time. It's a progressive disease. Well, maybe we'll see that if we repeat the lung function tests year after year. We did that in the marijuana smokers and the tobacco smokers and the controls. And lo and behold, we found that whereas lung function continued to decline at an accelerated rate in the tobacco smokers, it did not in the marijuana smokers. And that led us to believe that for one reason or another, marijuana smoking, even heavy smoking, does not appear to be associated with the development of COPD, or may not be a risk factor for COPD. Now, there are some other data in the literature that contradict that view, but those were our findings. That interested us. I have some theories as to why that is the case, but we might get to that later on.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to get to that, but so the other study, of course, the reason I hear is because of the recent study on the connection between marijuana, tobacco, and lung cancer. And I was wondering, how did you come to do that study?
Okay. Yes, that's a very good question. Well, we know that tobacco smoking is the most important cause of lung cancer and also head and neck cancer. Marijuana smoke contains much the same ingredients as are found in tobacco smoke, including a number of carcinogens, vinyl chlorides, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons like benzpyrene, phenols, nitrosamines. It contains billions of oxyradicals that cause oxidative stress that predisposes to carcinogenesis. So it's not an unreasonable hypothesis that if you smoke enough marijuana, that you may be at increased risk for developing respiratory cancer. That's number one. Number two, I already mentioned that the exposure of the lung to the carcinogens, the tar, which are contained largely in the tar fraction, is magnified by the fact that about 4 times as much of the tar is deposited in the lung from a marijuana cigarette compared to a tobacco cigarette of the same mass. That's number two. Number three, there are studies in cell cultures, tissue explants that show that exposure to marijuana, lung tissue explants, that in the test tube, if you will, results in accelerated malignant change. Mm-hmm. We know that marijuana smoke is mutagenic, and that mutations lead to cancer development. Then there are studies that we carried out extensively in marijuana smokers and controlled non-smokers, as well as in tobacco smokers, in which we inserted a lighted scope called a bronchoscope into the airways of our subjects, and we obtained biopsies of the tissue lining the airways, and we were surprised to find widespread changes, abnormalities, microscopic abnormalities in the cells that lining the airway, some of which are known to be precancerous. And the extent of abnormality was similar in the marijuana smokers compared to tobacco smokers, despite the disparity in the amount smoked. Mm-hmm. And then I won't bore you with the names. There's squamous metaplasia. We also looked at abnormalities in the nuclei. We also looked at molecular markers that would predict development of tumors and even more aggressive tumors. Ki-67 is a nuclear proliferation factor, and epidermal growth factor receptor are two of those that we looked at. They were markedly overexpressed in the airways of marijuana smokers compared to non-smokers, even more than in the tobacco smokers. So that led us to believe that it's plausible to expect, to hypothesize that there might be a link between marijuana smoking and cancer. Also, there are studies in man. There are case series of young people with either head and neck cancer or lung cancer in whom marijuana smoking is overrepresented. In some of these series, up to 90% of these individuals. It's rare to develop cancer when you're young, but over 90% in some series were marijuana smokers, a much higher proportion than in the general population. Also, there's some epidemiologic studies, even one of ours, that showed an increased risk. These are case control studies for head and neck cancer. On the other hand, there are other epidemiologic studies that show the opposite, or fail to show an association. Finally, we developed an animal model of lung cancer. It's a mouse model. And we found that if we implant lung cancer cells into the flanks of these animals, and then we treat some with THC.
This is Radical Russ here at Roller J Studios. We're going to break in right now, and more of this video is available if you go out to the internet. You can find it. I've also posted the links in our chat room. But right now, live on C-SPAN, we have a debate on medical marijuana in the U.S. House. That is definitely something we want to pay some attention to. So I'm going to get the video switched over to that screen just as best I can here. Let me bring up the audio while we're waiting. This is currently Representative Gerald Nadler from New York who is speaking on the topic. Let's bring that up.
And it will be a great thing for this country. I thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks time? Gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you, sir. I move to strike the last
Gentleman is
word.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been quite a few good arguments made, excellent arguments for the reason that this amendment should pass. Justice Louis Brandeis was one of my favorite justices, and he said the laboratories of democracy are the states. And indeed, 16 states, mostly through, if not entirely through, referenda, have determined that they wanted to try to find out whether medical marijuana laws would work. The federal government should not be infringing on what the states have determined and their citizens have determined in the most direct form of democracy that this nation knows, state referenda. And the federal government has been using its resources that could be used in better ways to police the jurisdictions that have voted it in. That's what this amendment does, is it says there will not be any additional spending of federal monies to try to thwart the will of the people of the states on issues in which they have voted. This is the most basic democracy that we could be talking about. You talk about the Founding Fathers, this is the people who give us power. They have voted in their states to make it the law. and the federal government has taken its heavy hand and tried to come in there and have come in there and prosecuted individuals. It's for the state to prosecute those individuals if they want. As the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, has pointed out, federal priorities have to be made to meet the resources available. The monies that they're spending now in these states could be spent on border traffic, could be spent on policing against heroin and cocaine, which cause people, when they get hooked, to commit violent crimes to get their money to buy their drugs. That's never been known to be the case with marijuana, and is not the case with marijuana. That's where our priorities for law enforcement should go and prosecution should go, is crack and cocaine and heroin, and they're not being used there. So this is a common sense, basic democratic proposal to tell our federal government that has gone astray to not use its resources against the people of this country who've made this determination. Now, as far as some of the other statements that have been made, I think the public who listens knows that this is not about legalization. This is not about 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds or 18-year-olds. It's about states, democracy, doctors, and people who have cancer, glaucoma, AIDS, MS, whatever. Montel Williams has testified how it's helped him with his illness. I had a Navy SEAL friend who died of cancer. There is no question but that marijuana, which he smoked, helped him with his appetite when he wasn't eating, and his pancreatic cancer took him from 215 pounds to 115. And his grandmother said, it's the only thing that makes Oral laugh, and it's the only thing that makes Oral eat. And when he was dying, my friend, I wanted him to have whatever it could have to make his illness less damaging to him and less difficult to deal with. So I rise here and to assure people that it won't affect your states. It'll just be those states where it's been voted in. It will save resources and be able to give our government the proper direction to use its resources to protect us against heroin, crack, and cocaine. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Yields back.
There's Representative Steve Cohen, Democrat from Tennessee, on House debate over an amendment that would prevent DEA spending on raiding in medical marijuana states. Returning to the House floor, courtesy of C-SPAN.
Mr. Chairman, I salute.
Does the gentleman seek to strike the last word?
I seek to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I would strike many of the words we've heard today. I first want to acknowledge the leadership of my colleague from California. He has a characteristic that is all too rare in politics, an intellectual consistency. We have people who, on the one hand, talk about freedom and individual liberty and respect for states' rights, but when it comes up against some pet project of theirs, all that goes out the window. Let's be very clear. This is not a case of people advocating that other people smoke marijuana. It is, for me, an advocacy that we allow people some degree of free choice. I listened to the gentleman from Virginia, and I admire his diligence, but I have to say I disagreed with almost everything he said. There was one thing he said that I thought was appropriate. He said we shouldn't be debating this at 7:30, and I agree. We should have been debating it at 4:20. That would have been a much better time. But other than that, he says, what about 15-year-olds? They'll see marijuana centers. Well, they'll see liquor stores. They'll see many more liquor stores than marijuana centers. The notion that because something is inappropriate for a teenager or a child, adults should not be allowed to use it is mindlessness. You can't run a society that says we're not going to let a 15-year-old see the things a 15-year-old can't do. Liquor stores would be a great example. I have been disappointed on this point in the Obama administration. The Clinton administration was quite sensible on this. The Bush administration slipped back, and I had hoped that with the Obama administration it would be more sensible. The gentleman from Virginia said, well, this is a great source of money for the Mexicans. Sure, because we won't let people grow in America. To the extent that people are buying medical marijuana from Mexican drug cartels, I think a somewhat luridly overdone thing with regard to this, that's because we have had people refusing to allow them to grow it here in America for that use. People say, and again, I'm surprised at some of my conservative friends, well, there's no medical value. the federal government now becomes the arbiter and tells the states, you may not make that judgment that there's medical value. We know an awful lot of people think it has medical value for them as to addiction and the notion that, oh, you get all these drugs together. What marijuana has in common with OxyContin, which the gentleman from Virginia mentioned, and other drugs, is that we treat them the same. They're not the same in any rational way. They're not the same in addictive prospects. They're not the same, except that we treat them the same, and we're the ones, by this foolish policy that I regret the administration I support is engaging in, who give people the notion that they're the same thing. It's a very simple point. People in the states have voted that marijuana should be available for people who want to use it for medicinal purposes. And the states are then in charge of setting up ways to deal with it. And we have people out of their ideological opposition announcing that they will not be allowed to do that, that they will tell people that it has no medical use despite the testimony of so many who think it does. This, again, is a form that I thought we learned didn't work, and it's prohibition of the worst sort. And, by the way, it is going to lead to very ineffective law enforcement because we are a free country. You cannot impose in a free society like ours a regime of law enforcement that the public rejects without a great deal of repression. State by state by state, the people of the state have voted to allow this. So when we send the federal agents in to disregard what the state did, to disregard state law, of course you're going to engender resistance. Of course you're going to engender people going around. I have to say, and I would just close by saying, as I listen to this debate, I think tonight C-SPAN has merged with the Turner movie classics, because Reefer Madness, that great movie from the 30s, appears to be being shown on both channels. This notion that because 15-year-olds are watching us talk about how people who are ill and in pain should be allowed with the vote of the state to get marijuana prescribed by a doctor, and that's going to lead a 15-year-old to go out and do it, makes no logical sense. And as I said, if you're worried about what 15-year-olds can see, they can see X-rated movies that are being advertised. They can see cigarettes being sold widely. They can see alcohol. They can see all manner of things that we don't want them to do. This is a very sensible amendment. No one has shown, let me say finally, and you know the DEA, they want to do this. I have not seen the evidence that says that medical marijuana has led to any problem. I haven't seen it linked to crime. I haven't seen it linked to anything negative. What we have, frankly, are some prejudices being used to interfere with people's rights.
Gentleman's time has
expired. Of course,
expired.
is Representative Barney Frank, longtime supporter of marijuana legalization and friend of NORML.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We turn now to C-SPAN coverage.
Bipartisan amendment. I want to thank Mr. Rohrabacher and all of the co-sponsors of this amendment for their leadership and for bringing this amendment forward. This amendment would prohibit the Department of Justice from using federal funds to prevent the implementation of state laws authorizing the use of medical marijuana. In recent months, the federal government has stepped up raids on legally operating clinics in many states where it is permissible for seriously ill patients to be prescribed medical marijuana by their doctors. These raids are shutting down legally operating businesses and are putting the health and the well-being of patients with cancer, HIV and AIDS, multiple sclerosis, and other serious illnesses in jeopardy. Marijuana has proven medical uses that improves the quality of life and extends the lives of desperately ill people. By shutting down clinics, federal agents are forcing patients who may be dying, for example, of cancer, out into the streets to buy prescription drugs like narcotics, which oftentimes leads to prescription drug addiction. These raids also undermine the ability of states to faithfully implement the will of their voters. The people in my home state of California have voted to make medical marijuana legal. These laws have been enacted to allow patients safe and legal access to appropriately produce and dispense medical marijuana in the safest possible environment. Yet in the last 18 months, for whatever reason, the Drug Enforcement Administration has raided and shut down many licensed and regulated dispensaries, which are legal, mind you, under state law. For example, the Berkeley Patients Group in my district, which had worked closely with the City of Berkeley to stay in compliance with local and state laws in order to serve critically ill patients in my community, has been forced to close its doors and turn their patients away. Complying with the state law and relying on a memorandum from the Department of Justice, thousands of small businesses across my state have invested millions in dollars in building their businesses, created good-paying jobs, and have paid millions in taxes. The business owners in my home district are doing everything they can to comply with the law, but clinics in Oakland and Berkeley continue to be subject to raids by federal authorities. Many of my colleagues and I have made repeated requests to the Department of Justice to seek clarification regarding their enforcement policies on medical marijuana. Mr. Chair, this is about recognizing the will of the voters. The federal crackdowns ignore the will of the voters in 16 states across the nation. The clinics, doctors, and businesses which bring medicine, mind you, to suffering patients need clarity, certainty, and an end to arbitrary raids. We should be protecting, not undermining our democracy by prosecuting small business owners who pay taxes and comply with state laws in providing medicine to people in need. But really, most importantly, it should be compassion for our fellow Americans suffering from serious illness that compel us to vote for this amendment. It is the humane thing to do, and it is the right thing to do. And so I want to thank Mr. Rohrabacher once again and the co-sponsors of this amendment for bringing this forward tonight, and I urge and I vote.
Who seeks time? Gentleman from Colorado.
Representative Barbara Lee from Oakland in Oakland, California.
California for bringing forth this amendment. This amendment's absolutely critical for Colorado.
Jared Polis from Colorado.
We have a legal regulatory structure for medical marijuana. Many businesses and nonprofits that are active in providing patients with medical marijuana, and yet they live under constant fear of selective enforcement from the Attorney General or from the DEA. I had the opportunity in the Judiciary Committee to question the Attorney General with regard to this issue, and he acknowledged that the only possible enforcement, because of the large-scale use of medical marijuana in the states where it is legal, would be selective enforcement. And it's a very dangerous precedent, a very dangerous power to hand an Attorney General, a Department of Justice, and a DEA. I have heard from the other side of the aisle in different contexts many comments critical of the current Attorney General. But regardless of who is sitting as Attorney General, do we want to have an Attorney General that has the ability at any given time to engage in selective enforcement against a large group of people, whomever he or she wants to prosecute? What if the selective enforcement is politically motivated? What if we have an Attorney General that decides he or she doesn't like the Tea Party or doesn't like the Occupy movement? What if they then force the states to give the records that they keep of who has the medical marijuana licenses, and then goes after the people with whose politics they don't agree? It's a very, very dangerous road to go down, a dangerous power to give to the federal government. This is a very real and important issue. Drug abuse is a terrible problem, plagues our country, plagues Colorado families. We can reduce drug abuse and reduce access to minors of both marijuana as well as other drugs by making sure that we regulate them appropriately. In Colorado, medical marijuana dispensaries are regularly audited. They are required under state law to have video cameras to keep track of who comes and goes. Minors are not allowed to enter the premise. It is, of course, the underground illegal corner drug dealer that will sell to the 15-year-old, not the legal state-regulated dispensary. We have limited law enforcement capabilities, as highlighted by my colleague from California, Mr. Schiff. And to go after patients and their caregivers rather than drug smugglers and Mexican drug cartels does a huge disservice, not only to law enforcement, but also to the many, many victims of the drug war, both from collateral damage as well as those who fall victim to drugs themselves. It's critical at a time when our nation continues to battle with narcotic use that our limited resources are focused on the real problem. The real problem is not the 68-year-old cancer patient. The real problem is not the business or the nonprofit that operates under a legal state regulatory system in providing these essential services in our communities in accordance with state and local law. This amendment is common sense. I hope that colleagues on both sides of the aisle join in passing this amendment. And I understand that for many of our colleagues, they don't yet have or they don't have legal medical marijuana in their states. And that's fine. No one's saying they should or they shouldn't. It's up to the residents of each state to decide how they want to treat the criminal aspects of regulating marijuana use. What we're asking is for those of you who come from states who don't have legal marijuana, consider that some states might think about it a little differently. Consider that some states have, in fact, authorized dispensaries and authorized a system to ensure that it stays out of the hands of minors to focus their state law enforcement resources on harder drugs and ensuring that minors don't have access to marijuana or other drugs. And consider that that is their prerogative, just as it is your prerogative in your state to continue to approach marijuana usage as a criminal issue. I call upon my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this important amendment, to focus our limited resources and allow legal businesses and legal caregivers to operate without the fear of a DEA agent busting in their door. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman
Jared
from Virginia.
Polis, the representative from Colorado, speaking on the House floor.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I hear people talking about the states' rights. If a state said that sexual trafficking is okay, would we honor that and say that we're not going to protect? I would hope not. States in the past have done some things that have not been good in this country. Secondly, we know that many of these marijuana dispensaries are simply fronts for illegal marijuana distribution. The FDA noted in 2006, quote, that there is currently sound evidence that smoked marijuana is harmful, and that, quote, no sound scientific studies supported medical use of marijuana for treatment in the United States, and no animal or human data supported the safety or efficacy of marijuana for general medical use, end of quote. As required by the Controlled Substances Act, the DEA requested a scientific and medical evaluation and scheduling recommendation from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which concluded, and I quote, that marijuana, the stuff that we're saying tonight, anybody, and you saw the 60-minute piece, they come in, they buy, they take. We talk about doctors. The number of doctors that were ripping off people with OxyContin. The number of doctors that were devastating. You can go down to Broward County in Florida and go into some of these pain clinics. There are buses coming down and planes coming down to buy it, and doctors are writing prescriptions. So we're going to hide behind and just say doctors are. The number of doctors that ruin young people on OxyContin, whereby they died. And so to hide behind a doctor says that means it's okay. But Health and Human Services said, quote, marijuana has a high potential for abuse, has no accepted medical use in the United States, and lacks an acceptable level of safety for use under medical supervision. I may be the only one in this body that feels this way. But I'll tell you, I think if this amendment passes and this becomes the law, this will be a gateway to young people. This will literally send a message down to the Mexican cartels. There is going to be a market all over. It'll also increase automobile accidents because you'll basically be finding people that are driving while they're high versus driving while they're intoxicated. And so Lastly, I just hope and ask that we defeat this amendment. Why don't you have hearings in the Judiciary Committee? Why don't you have hearings some other place? But at 7:30 or 5, and my friend from Massachusetts was joking about the time, we're 5 after 8. We're doing this. We're changing the law, and I think it will be bad for the country, and urge a no vote.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Representative Frank Wolf, the Republican from Virginia, was that last speaker.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Gentleman to suspend. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from California.
I request a recorded
Pursuant
vote.
to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Lewis of Georgia. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds provided by this act may be obligated for the purpose of closing the regional field offices of the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
It appears we have ended the debate on the medical marijuana amendment. For those of you just joining us here on NORML Show Live, we were bringing you coverage, and we want to give thanks to the folks, the activists out at SSDP, who Khalifa saw their alert that there was a live debate going on the House floor that was being covered on C-SPAN with regard to an amendment being brought up to forbid the Department of Justice, forbid any appropriation of funds for the Department of Justice to be able to use in busting state legal medical marijuana facilities, providers, etc. Basically, an amendment to defund the raids for the DEA. And there you go. That's some great stuff. We got that all recorded on video. Some great statements by Representatives Barbara Lee, Jared Polis, Steve Cohen, Barney Frank. Did I miss any? I think we got them all there, Khalifa.
Then, of course, the Reefer Madness dude from Virginia. But other than that, you got it.
Got to close with Reefer Madness dude. So we will have that up and available as soon as I can get it uploaded to YouTube, and we will cut that out for you and provide some more highlights for tomorrow's show. But that's all the time we've got for this hour. Actually, we're 9 minutes into the second hour. Stay tuned for Toker Talk Radio. Coming up next here, we've got Wiz Khalifa, Brian the Red, Cool Craig's here today, too. And, of course, Carrie and Kyle still hanging out in the virtual studio. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.
This is NORML Show Live, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Take it on one more time. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.
You're listening to the NORML Network. It's 5 o'clock in the Pacific Time Zone. The workday is done. Now it's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation.
What are you people? On dope?
Where you can toke.
I inhale frequently.
Or you can talk.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
Or you can toke and talk.
10 federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
While we talk about toke on Toker Talk Radio.
So, by the way, when it comes to pot, if you're 40 years old, you live in a log cabin in Oregon, you got 12 giant pot plants in your backyard, have a ball.
Live from beautiful Portland, Oregon at Rolla J Studios.
Hey, this is great. Yes, cannabis.
Featuring Cannabis Carrie, Ganja John, Wiz Khalifa, and other live guests.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man, the Snoopy Poop Dog.
Plus your calls, live at 971-53.